The little boy was standing beside his mother, staring at the bowl of soup on the table like it was the most precious thing in the world. The single father noticed the boy's trembling hands before he noticed the woman's tired eyes. Then she whispered 5 words that changed all 3 of their lives. "My son's hungry. Can we stay?" If you believe that a small act of kindness can change someone's entire life, take a moment to like this story, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Daniel had learned how to eat alone. For almost 2 years, he had been sitting across from an empty chair every evening, pretending he didn't notice it. His wife, Emily, had died suddenly after a long illness, leaving Daniel with their 8-year-old son, Noah, and a house that felt far too quiet. Daniel had tried to keep everything normal. He worked during the day, picked Noah up from school, helped with homework, cooked simple dinners, and read bedtime stories even when his voice became tired. But there were some nights when the silence became unbearable. That rainy Thursday evening was one of them. Daniel had taken Noah to a small family restaurant near the train station. It wasn't fancy. The tables were old, the windows fogged from the rain, and the smell of warm soup filled the room. Noah was supposed to come with him. But at the last minute, Noah had developed a fever and Daniel's sister had taken him home. So Daniel went alone. He ordered a bowl of soup, some bread, and coffee. He sat beside the window and watched the rain slide down the glass. Across from him was an empty chair. Again. Daniel lowered his eyes. He hated that chair. He hated how every restaurant seemed to remind him that someone was missing. He had just lifted his spoon when he heard a quiet voice. "Excuse me?" Daniel looked up. A woman stood beside his table. She was probably in her early 30s. Her coat was damp from the rain, her hair slightly messy, and she carried a small backpack. Beside her stood a little boy. He looked about 7. His shoes were wet. His face was pale, and his eyes were fixed on Daniel's bowl of soup. The woman noticed where her son was looking. Her face immediately turned red. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "We'll leave." Daniel looked at the boy again. The child tried to look away. But his stomach made a quiet growling sound. The boy's eyes dropped to the floor. Daniel put his spoon down. "Please," he said. "Sit." The woman hesitated. "I don't want to bother you." "You're not bothering me." She looked at the empty chair. Daniel nodded toward it. Someone was supposed to sit there anyway. The woman slowly pulled out the chair. "My name is Sarah," she said. The boy whispered, "Lucas." Daniel smiled gently. "I'm Daniel." The waiter approached, and Sarah immediately said, "Just water for us, please." Daniel looked at her. "No. He needs food." Sarah shook her head. "We can't afford." "I didn't ask." She stared at him. Daniel turned toward the waiter. "Bring him whatever he wants." The boy looked at his mother. She looked embarrassed. "Lucas," she whispered, "you can choose one thing." The boy studied the menu carefully. "Can I have soup?" Daniel smiled. "Of course." Then Lucas looked at him. "And bread?" "Definitely." For the first time that evening, the boy smiled. Daniel watched him eat. Slowly at first. Then faster. Sarah kept saying, "Slow down, sweetheart." But Lucas couldn't. Daniel understood why. He had seen hunger before. Not physical hunger. The hunger of losing someone. The hunger of wanting life to feel normal again. When Lucas finished his soup, he looked embarrassed. "Thank you." Daniel nodded. "You're welcome." Sarah lowered her voice. "I promise, I'm not usually like this." Daniel looked at her. "Like what?" "Accepting food from strangers." "You're not accepting charity," he said. "You're having dinner." She smiled sadly. "I wish it were that simple." Daniel noticed the sadness behind her eyes. He didn't push. But before they left, Sarah suddenly asked, "Why are you alone?" Daniel looked toward the empty chair. "My son is sick. My wife passed away 2 years ago." Sarah's expression changed immediately. "I'm sorry." "So am I." There was a long silence. Then Lucas looked at Daniel. "My dad left too." Sarah closed her eyes. "Lucas." "It's okay," Daniel said. Lucas continued. "He said he was coming back." Daniel looked at the boy. Sometimes adults promise things they don't know how to keep. Sarah looked down. She knew exactly what Daniel meant. That night, they said goodbye. Daniel thought he would never see them again. But the next evening, Sarah returned. This time, Lucas was holding a folded piece of paper. He walked straight to Daniel's table. "I made this for you." Daniel opened it. It was a drawing of 3 people sitting around a table. A man, a woman, and a little boy. Above them, Lucas had drawn a yellow sun. Daniel swallowed hard. "What's this?" Lucas smiled. "You said you were eating alone." Sarah looked embarrassed. "I told him not to bother you." Daniel shook his head. "It's not a bother." Lucas pointed to the drawing. "Now you're not alone." Those words broke something inside Daniel. For months, he had been trying to convince himself that he didn't need anyone. That he could raise Noah alone. That loneliness was simply the price of survival. But suddenly, sitting across from him was a child who had understood something Daniel had forgotten. People don't always need someone to fix their lives. Sometimes they just need someone to sit beside them. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Lucas became familiar faces. They never asked Daniel for money. Daniel never asked about their past. They simply ate together. Sometimes Daniel brought Noah. Sometimes Lucas brought a drawing. Sometimes Sarah brought homemade cookies. The children became friends. And Daniel began laughing again. But one rainy evening, everything changed. Daniel arrived at the restaurant and found Sarah standing outside. She was crying. "Daniel," she whispered. "What happened?" She looked toward the parking lot. A black car was waiting there. "My ex-husband found us." Daniel froze. "Lucas's father?" She nodded. "He wants custody." "Why?" Sarah wiped her eyes. "He disappeared for 3 years. Now he suddenly says he has money, a lawyer, and a stable home. He says I'm an unfit mother because I lost my job." Daniel stared at her. "What does Lucas want?" Sarah looked toward the restaurant window. "He wants to stay with me." Daniel felt a knot form in his chest. Then Sarah whispered something else. "He knows about you." Daniel frowned. "Me?" "He says you're a stranger who has been influencing my son." Daniel immediately understood. Someone was trying to use their friendship against Sarah. "I'll help you find a lawyer," Daniel said. Sarah shook her head. "No. You've already done too much." Daniel looked at her. "You once told me you didn't want charity." She nodded. "This isn't charity." He paused. "This is family helping family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But Daniel didn't know how complicated the situation really was. 2 days later, Daniel received a phone call from an unknown number. A man's voice said, "Stay away from Sarah and Lucas." Daniel's expression hardened. "Who is this? You don't want trouble." The call ended. Daniel immediately contacted Sarah. She admitted that Lucas's father had been threatening her. But there was one thing she had never told Daniel. She had been hiding documents proving that her ex-husband had abandoned Lucas deliberately and had previously been investigated for neglect. The custody hearing was only 3 days away. Sarah was terrified. Daniel helped her organize the documents. But he couldn't testify about her family. He was only a friend. Then, on the morning of the hearing, something unexpected happened. Lucas disappeared. Sarah called Daniel in panic. "I can't find him." Daniel rushed to the school. Police were already there. Then Daniel noticed something. A security camera pointed toward the parking lot. He watched the footage. Lucas had not been taken. He had walked away by himself. Daniel remembered the restaurant. The drawing. The words. "Now you're not alone." He suddenly knew where Lucas might be. The little train station. Daniel ran there. He found Lucas sitting on a bench, holding his backpack tightly. "Lucas." The boy looked up. "I didn't run away." Daniel sat beside him. "I know. I just wanted to find my dad." Daniel's heart sank. "Why?" Lucas looked at the ground. "Because Mommy said he left. But maybe he didn't leave because he didn't love me." Daniel was silent. Then Lucas whispered, "Maybe I wasn't good enough." Daniel immediately turned toward him. "Never say that again." Lucas looked at him. "Adults make adult decisions. Children don't cause adults to leave." Lucas began crying. Daniel pulled him into a hug. "You are not responsible for what your father did." At that moment, Sarah arrived. She ran toward Lucas and hugged him so tightly that both of them began crying. Daniel stepped back. But Lucas reached for his hand. "Stay." Daniel looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere." That afternoon, Sarah told the truth in court. She showed the evidence of Lucas's father's abandonment and threats. The judge listened carefully. Daniel was not the hero of the case. Sarah was. She had found the courage to stand up for herself. And Lucas finally understood that his father leaving had never been his fault. Weeks later, Sarah and Lucas moved into a small apartment closer to Daniel and Noah. One evening, the four of them returned to the same restaurant where everything had started. Daniel sat down. Noah sat beside him. Lucas sat across from Noah. Sarah took the last chair. Daniel looked around the table. There was no empty chair anymore. Lucas lifted his glass of juice. To not eating alone. Everyone laughed. Daniel looked at Sarah. She smiled. Neither of them needed to say what they were both thinking. Sometimes life takes people away. Sometimes it sends new people into the empty spaces. Not to replace anyone. Not to erase the past. But to remind us that our story is not over. Years later, Daniel would still remember that rainy night. He would remember the frightened woman standing beside his table. He would remember a hungry little boy staring at a bowl of soup. And most of all, he would remember 5 simple words. "My son's hungry. Can we stay?" Those words had seemed like a request for dinner. But they had actually been a request for connection. And Daniel had discovered that night that kindness doesn't always cost money. Sometimes it costs nothing more than opening an empty chair. The greatest lesson is this: never underestimate the power of a small act of kindness. You may think you're simply helping someone through one difficult evening, but to them, you might be giving them hope, dignity, and a reason to believe in people again. And sometimes, the empty seat you are afraid to face is exactly the space where a beautiful new chapter of your life begins.